Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. I didn't mean to overhear it. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but sometimes the truth finds you whether you're ready or not. It was a Saturday night. We had company over. Her friends, her family, people she always seemed more comfortable with than she ever was with me. I had been in the kitchen, clearing away dishes, half listening to the conversations drifting in from the living room. They were laughing. The kind of laughter that feels exclusive, like you're on the outside of a joke. And then I heard her voice. He can't please anyone. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. That light, casual tone, like it was some universally acknowledged truth, like it was obvious to everyone in the room. The laughter that followed was loud, genuine, shared, because apparently they all agreed. I don't even know what the conversation had been about before that. Maybe she had been talking about something small, how I forgot to get the right brand of coffee, or how I couldn't fix the bathroom sink last week. Maybe she was talking about something bigger, how I never got her gifts that she actually liked, how I wasn't romantic enough, how I never made her feel the way she wanted to feel. It didn't matter. The message was clear. I stood there, gripping the edge of the sink, waiting for her to take it back, to say she was just joking, to soften the blow somehow. But she didn't. She kept talking, moving on to something else like the words hadn't just hit me like a slap to the face. I wasn't angry. Not at first. The first thing I felt was humiliation, the kind that burns from the inside out. I felt small, like I had been stripped down to nothing in front of people who already saw me as less than I thought I was. And then I realized something. This wasn't new. This wasn't the first time she had spoken about me like this. I started thinking back, tracing the moments in my mind, little remarks, sarcastic jokes, the way she rolled her eyes when I talked, the way she sighed when I didn't get things exactly right. It had been happening for a long time. I just hadn't let myself fully see it. I wasn't an equal partner in her eyes. I was a punchline. I let the conversation play out while I stood there, silent. The laughter faded into background noise. I was done clearing the dishes, but I didn't move. My hands rested against the counter, gripping harder than necessary. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I had spent years bending over backward to make her happy, to be enough. I had believed that if I just tried harder, she'd see me differently. If I just did more, she'd love me more. But that wasn't how it worked, was it? She didn't see my effort. She didn't see my sacrifices. She saw a man who never measured up, a man she could openly mock in front of her friends and family without a second thought. And that was when something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to argue with her. I wasn't going to confront her in front of everyone and demand an apology. I wasn't going to make a scene. It would have been me, the version of me that always tried to fix things, to smooth things over, to prove I was worth something. Instead, I made a decision. I was done trying to please her. I sat through the rest of the evening like a ghost in my own home. I responded when spoken to, nodded at the right moments. But I wasn't really there. My mind was somewhere else, replaying things I had buried for years. After that night when the guests were gone, and the house was quiet, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She had fallen asleep quickly, as if nothing had happened, as if the night had been perfectly normal. But for me, everything was different. That one comment, so casual, so effortless, had been the key that unlocked a door I hadn't wanted to open. A door filled with moments I had ignored, excused, convinced myself weren't as bad as they seemed. I started remembering. I remembered birthdays where I planned surprises, only to hear her sigh and say, "You really thought I'd like this?" I remembered trying to cook for her once, only for her to take a bite, wrinkle her nose, and push the plate away without a word. I remembered dressing up for a rare date night, putting in extra effort, only for her to glance at me and say, "That's what you're wearing." One memory bulled into another, like a highlight reel of every moment I had felt less in this marriage. And yet I had kept trying. I remembered the first time I had overheard her complaining about me to her friends. It wasn't quite as blunt as what she had said that night, but the message had been the same. I had brushed it off, told myself that people vent, that it didn't mean she didn't love me. I had told myself a lot of things over the years. I had told myself that her constant criticism came from a place of wanting me to be better. That the coldness in her voice wasn't intentional. That the way she never seemed satisfied wasn't about me, but about something she was dealing with. I had rewritten the truth so many times just to make it livable. But sitting there with my mind replaying every moment I had let slide, I felt something shift. I had spent so much time trying to make her happy, thinking if I just did more, if I just became better, she'd finally look at me the way I had always looked at her. But I finally understood something that night. It had never been about what I was doing wrong. It had been about the fact that nothing I did would ever be enough for her. I woke up the next morning feeling different. Not lighter, not free, just aware. Aware in a way I hadn't been before. For so long my life had revolved around making her happy. Every decision, every small act, every word I spoke was carefully measured against how she might react. Would she be annoyed? Would she be disappointed? Would she criticize me? I had learned to adjust, to adapt, to anticipate. It was like living in a house with uneven floors. I had gotten so used to stepping carefully that I forgot what it felt like to just walk. But now I didn't feel like walking carefully anymore. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't sit her down and say, "I'm done trying to please you." That wasn't necessary. What I did instead was something much simpler. I stopped. I stopped going out of my way to seek approval that was never coming. That morning, she came into the kitchen while I was making coffee. Normally, I'd ask if she wanted some. This time I didn't. I just poured my own cup and sat down at the table. She paused for a second, waiting, like she expected me to offer. When I didn't, she gave a little huff and made her own. It was small, almost nothing, but it felt like the first crack in a dam. After that day, she asked me to pick up something from the store. I had other plans, things I wanted to do for myself for once. In the past, I would have dropped everything to run the errand, to avoid the argument, to keep her from sighing and shaking her head at me like I was a disappointment. But this time I simply said, "I can't. I've got things to do." She blinked at me like she hadn't heard right. "You can't." "No, not today." She scoffed, muttered something under her breath, and walked away. I expected to feel guilty. That was the usual pattern. I'd say no, she'd react, and then guilt would eat at me until I caved. But this time, there was no guilt, just relief. I had spent years over-explaining myself, making excuses, justifying my own boundaries as if I needed permission to have them. But what was the point? She never gave me the benefit of the doubt. She never tried to see my side. Why was I exhausting myself trying to be understood by someone who had no interest in understanding me? So I stopped explaining. If I didn't want to do something, I just didn't do it. If she made a sarcastic remark, I didn't argue or try to prove her wrong. I just let it hang in the air until she realized I wasn't going to react. If she complained about me to her friends, I didn't sit there and absorb it like a sponge. I had no intention of being cruel. I wasn't trying to get revenge or play games, but I had spent years bending over backward for someone who had never once met me halfway. And I was done. At first she didn't notice. She was so used to me accommodating her, so used to me adjusting myself around her moods, her wants, her expectations, that the shift didn't register immediately. But then, small things started to add up. I stopped filling the silence when she sighed dramatically, waiting for me to ask what's wrong. I stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. I stopped going out of my way to make her comfortable at my own expense. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just withdrew from the game I had unknowingly been playing for years. And that's when she noticed. It started with small jabs. "You've been acting weird lately. Is something wrong with you? You're different." At first I think she thought it was temporary, like maybe I was just in a mood, or I was upset about something and waiting for her to ask. But I wasn't waiting. I wasn't expecting anything from her anymore. And that bothered her. She started testing me, throwing out little barbs to see if I'd bite. You never do anything right. You'd be lost without me. God, you're impossible. Before I would have responded, I would have tried to prove her wrong, tried to convince her I was good enough, that I was worth something. But I didn't do that anymore. I just looked at her, let her words sit there, and then moved on like they meant nothing. Because they didn't. Not anymore. The first time I did that, just looked at her and then walked away, I saw something flicker across her face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was uncertainty. And I realized something. She had always been in control. Not through force, not through direct commands, but through expectations. She had shaped me over time, worn me down like water against stone, until I was someone who never questioned, never pushed back, never existed outside of what she needed me to be. But now, that version of me was gone, and she didn't know what to do with that. I could see her scrambling to regain control in the only way she knew how. Picking fights over nothing, criticizing things that didn't need criticizing, making offhanded comments meant to bait me into reacting. But I wasn't playing anymore. And that scared her, because for the first time, I wasn't afraid to lose her. She tried everything. When her usual tactics stopped working, she switched strategies. At first she doubled down, more sarcasm, more passive-aggressive remarks, more ways to test if I would crack. But I didn't. I stayed calm. I didn't give her the reaction she was used to. And that's when she started to panic. I noticed it in the little things. The way she hovered when I didn't immediately answer her, the way she would watch me, waiting for me to care like I used to. She wanted me to argue, to fight back, to prove I still wanted her approval. But that version of me was already gone. Then came the anger. One night I was sitting on the couch, flipping through my phone, completely unbothered. She was pacing, huffing under her breath, and I could feel the tension building. I knew what was coming before she even said it. You don't even care anymore, do you? I looked up at her. I could have said a lot of things. I could have denied it, tried to soothe her like I used to. I could have pretended just to keep the peace. But I didn't. No, I said simply. That was it. No argument, no justification. Just the truth. And that's when everything snapped. She lost control, not in a violent way, but in a way that told me she had finally realized she had no control left. She threw every accusation she could think of. How I was cold, how I had changed, how I was selfish and distant and different. You're not the man I married. That one made me pause, because for the first time in a long time, I looked at her and agreed. No, I'm not. I told her, and I wasn't. I wasn't the man who spent his life walking on eggshells, trying to make her happy at my own expense. I wasn't the man who swallowed his own needs just to avoid conflict. I wasn't the man who needed her approval to feel like I was enough. I wasn't her version of me anymore. And I think that scared her more than anything. Because she finally understood. I wasn't afraid of losing her, but she was afraid of losing the man she had controlled for so long. She didn't take it well. After that night, after I told her I wasn't the man she married, something between us officially broke. The illusion, the one I had been holding on to for years, was gone. At first she tried to act like nothing had changed. She would wake up and go through the motions, expecting me to fall back in line. She'd make little comments, subtle tests, trying to see if I would react. I didn't. And that's when the silence began. She stopped trying to provoke me. She stopped trying to talk to me at all. Our house, which once had been filled with tension, was now filled with something else. Distance. And I was fine with that. For the first time in years, I wasn't constantly on edge, waiting for the next criticism, the next disapproving sigh, the next moment where I would feel like I was failing. I wasn't failing anymore because I wasn't playing her game. I had nothing left to prove. Then one evening, she finally said it. So what now? I looked at her from across the room. She had her arms crossed, her expression guarded. This wasn't a question about dinner, or the weekend, or something trivial. This was bigger. She knew it. And so did I. I took a deep breath. I don't know, I admitted. But I know I'm not going back to how things were. She stared at me for a long time. I saw something flash across her face. Maybe regret, maybe realization, maybe just fear. Because she finally understood. I was done. Not just with the arguments. Not just with the constant need to prove myself. I was done being someone I wasn't. Just to hold together something that had never really been whole in the first place. I don't know what she expected me to say. Maybe she thought I would ask if we could fix things. Maybe she thought I would say I still wanted this marriage. But I didn't. Because I didn't want this. Not the way it had been. Not the way it would always be. And I think deep down, she didn't want it either. We were done long before I ever stopped trying. The difference now was, I knew it.